is or what it might be. So is it possible that they're doing that? Yes, it is absolutely possible. Would it be very tricky to pull off? Yes. Because I had a very learned man once tell me, he asked me a question. He said, how many people can you have in a functional conspiracy? How many people, yeah, what do you think? How many people can you have in a functional conspiracy?
Well, the only example that we can point to would be the atomic bomb program, actually.
But it wasn't. It was leaked. The Rosenbergs leaked the designs, and there was a lot of exfiltration of information during that program. So the answer to that question is one. And I asked the guy. I said, "Well, what do you do with the other guy?" And the individual looked at me very calmly and said, "You shoot him."
That's so true.
Right. So yes, it is absolutely possible. Is it feasible? Absolutely. In fact, I would argue to you that it is a distinct possibility because of the amount of information that has been leaked. You've got the Holloman landing. You have all kinds of people who talk about the Holloman landing. There are the stories about the ending of Close Encounters of the Third Kind being a reenactment of the Holloman landing and how that's linked to Serpo. Is Serpo real? Is Serpo not real? You have all these things that come together. So I would say that based on the fact that there's so much information about it, I would say that it is a distinct possibility, yes. Is it, to me personally, is it likely? I don't think so. Because you have an alien intelligence that's now assisting the U.S. government or multiple governments in trying to save people, to save us from ourselves or whatever. And the first question that I would ask is that shows a level of benevolence that I've never seen in anything in my life. What would be the end game for them to do that? That's the question you have to ask. And there are answers to that question. There are a lot of answers to that question, which makes me believe even more that it's possible and feasible because there is a solution, right? It's not a conundrum. So if they are doing it, what's their end game? Well, their end game could be a lot of things. It could be that they have a philosophical need to assist, lesser developed beings such as ourselves from blowing ourselves up. Or maybe they want to enslave us, or maybe they want us to be part of their cosmic brotherhood, or whatever. It doesn't really matter. There are options, so that means that it's theoretically possible. I don't think that it's likely, because if they possess the amount of power required to travel from even a close-by star to here, they got to be either using a wormhole, or they're folding space, or doing something that uses just a tremendous amount of power. So now you've got to ask yourself, well, if they're so benevolent that they want to help us so badly, if they're able to control that much power, right? Why aren't they coming down and forcing the governments of the world, or forcing people, or exfiltrating the information out into the world community to allow us to actually save ourselves? Because they would know. If they have ever watched any of the crap that we broadcast into space, they watch Survivor at all, they're going to know that we're barbaric and we're narcissistic, and I would say that on a global level, we can be psychopathic. So, they know that by dealing with one government over another, they're going to cause a war, or they're dealing with multiple governments. Those multiple governments are going to be innately selfish, to take care of themselves first, and the information will never be distributed. This is the argument of the day the Earth stood still, right? That he lands, he steps out, he's going to give them the answer to all of our problems. And what do? They shoot him.
Right? But that's true. That's what would happen.
That is true. Oh yeah, and he's benevolent. And he's basically like, look, you got to clean up your act. We're going to blow you up because we don't want you around if you're going to cause strife. And eventually he sneaks around and gets a hold of the scientists and finishes the equation, and everything's better. But That's the best case scenario. And so is it possible? Yes. Is it feasible? Yes. Is it likely? I don't think so, but that doesn't mean that it isn't actually happening.
Well,
does that answer your question?
Now,
yes.
Both of you guys, don't you think we could be just basically a science experiment at this point? They're watching us to see what we're going to do with ourselves, and they're monitoring us and monitoring our thoughts. That's why they have the abductions and the implants, just to see what's going to happen, and maybe that's why they're not helping us.
That's what I think. I think that they're basically cosmic biologists and anthropologists. And they've shown up, it's either that or the ultra-terrestrial model where they're people from the future, and this is some sort of a pivotal moment. And they're coming to watch and see what happens.
Well, you go back
Those are the two.
You go back to Germany, when they were working supposedly on the Bell and all this stuff. And then you talk about Antarctica, supposedly that the Nazi group scientists was working with aliens. Maybe they were actually been feeling Germany to a certain point to see what would happen to create a huge war, which it was at that time. And then, basically, okay, well, hey, you're on your own now. And just to see what happens.
It's totally possible. It's totally possible. I think the problem with using the Germans, using the Nazis specifically as a tool to do that, is that the rise of Nazism and fascism in Europe came into play because of a very specific set of environmental circumstances. That you had hyperinflation, and that gave rise to somebody who walked in and said, hey, I can fix all your problems. It's real easy. Just do everything I say, and we're going to eradicate these people, and it's going to make everything better. And they bought into it because things were going bad real fast.
Oh, yeah.
I would say that if I was going to apply that argument, I would say actually for World War I, because you've got basically when Archduke Ferdinand was murdered by I believe he was a Serbian anarchist. In every situation since then, when something like that happened, it was like, okay, international incident. Things get kind of testy for a while, and then they calm down again. And maybe that's a byproduct of having nuclear weapons. I don't know. But in my mind, it's the only time I can see that ever happening where the entire world went to hell in a handbasket, and we had to fight a massive war. And maybe that's oversimplifying it, but it was the ignition. And it doesn't, I don't know. It never made sense to me. But
and then, going back to Barney Hill, do you believe he was abducted? Do you believe that his demise was... I've heard that his demise was basically our government took him out. I don't know if you believe that. I've read all different conspiracies on that.
I've never heard that part, but I do believe that he was taken aboard the ship, and I think that they did do experiments. And that's consistent with my larger worldview of who the Nordics are and who, because I firmly believe the Nordics are not, Nazi derivatives. And so when taking him aboard and doing the experiments, even the abductions, and the screen memories, the owls and the other stuff, it makes sense to me. Because if I was living on Venus, I don't think they want to live there. I think that they eventually want to come back. And if you want to come back, you want to know the state of the place that you're coming back to, what you're dealing with. And I think that's where you give rise to things like abductions and other stuff.
Yeah.
At least some of them. Because, you have MILLAB, and that's the whole military abduction thing where people claim to have been abducted by military units and experimented upon and other stuff. So I think that when you get into that realm, you're definitely, dealing with something entirely different. But again, I'm very much an open-minded guy, and I'm happy to listen to anybody's theories about what's actually going on, because I don't think any of us have the answer.
I really don't. I think some of the abductions you hear about were totally fabricated by the government to debunk other abductions. So it seems that's
It would not be the first time.
Yeah, I know. And it's sure strange. A lot of scientists back in the 90s, kind of like died off in a very short time of one after each other. I mean, either a major going off the road or having heart attacks or all kinds of weird things.
Well, there was a group of scientists and technicians that worked for Marconi, and Marconi was a subcontractor, I believe, for the SDI program. And I mean, they had a whole lot of people that committed suicide and had car accidents, and within a couple of years, there were a whole ton of people that died.
Well, it's scary. What scares me too is I had a former government agent on my show. It told me flatly they got devices out. They could be in a car, right? And you're in your living room, and they can point this device at you and cause you to have a massive heart attack and keel over dead. Sure. And I didn't even know about all this stuff too. He brought that up.
The Soviets actually engaged in a long-term program where they were trying to figure out if they could use psychics to do that. And I mean, you're not talking like a year or two, you're talking like decades, where they actually did tests of people trying to project like heart attacks on other people. They're always finding a new and inventive way to kill other people. We excel at it.
Yeah. That's one thing, I'm just wondering, where it's going to go here now. It's funny, the people, like when you had the disaster, it happened in New York, with the plane slamming into the tower. People rallied, for weeks and weeks, but then all of a sudden it was like, no big deal. And then you have all this other stuff where, anything major happens, people have a very short memory. And within weeks or months, they kind of like forget about it and move on, like it never happened.
Well, that's why you need a long-term enemy. And unfortunately for us, we imploded our long-term enemy. And when they imploded, we had no enemy. And so then we found some other enemies for a while. And that didn't kind of work out for us. So now we're reigniting the Cold War so that we can have an enemy again. And, if you think about it, the Cold War, great for business, right? Because you've got the SDI program, got ballistic missiles, submarines, ships, planes, boats, tanks, all kinds of soldiers, bullets, body armor. It's good business, right? And that's the way the world works. And you look at the Russians, the petrodollar collapses, they're having a hard time economically. So it makes good sense for them to start up a bit of a Cold War as well, because now they have an enemy too. We don't like them, they don't like us. Now we've got B-52s back out at the fail-safe points. We've got, ballistic missile and cruise missile submarines, trolling around. We've got hunter-killer subs that are out there looking for the Russians. They're flying bombers toward us. We're flying bombers toward them. We're flipping each other off as we pass by in the air. But what it does is it means that we need more planes, more bombs, and that's money, and it boosts our economy. So, and it keeps the populace unstable, but it also gives them a rallying point where they can point in that direction and go, we don't like those guys, They just don't do duck and cover drills. I remember when I was a kid, even in the 80s, we were still doing duck and cover drills, Three blasts of the air raid siren meant the attack was imminent. I mean, that whole thing.
Yeah, but you talk about the, going under like the table and stuff. I remember that. Oh, going under the table, right? That's not going to protect you. But Reagan did this thing, and I don't know how many times it appeared, but it was not many people even remember it. That's how people's memory is short. He did this little thing that if we were ever attacked, we'd have so much time, to prepare for it. And if you couldn't get out of the area, he mentioned about digging a hole, at certain depth. Take your doors off of your house, right? Lay it across.
Cover yourself.
Yeah, and put 3 feet of dirt on it. And that 3 feet of dirt would absorb so much radiation. I looked at it. No, that was a fast way just to bury you, for they didn't have to come back and clean it up.
That's probably true. Yeah, I forget the number of minutes when I was a kid. You know, I was like a lot of kids.
13 minutes, I remember
in the
that.
80s.
13 minutes back then.
Yeah. In the 80s, in the early 80s, you know, the Cold